California Building Standards Code as applied to buildings regulated by OSHPD. My name is Caesar. I am here with a team of Richard Tannehill, Lori Campbell, and Nancy Timmons, who is going to be doing the awesome presentation today. You are joining us for the presentation session 2 of 4 sessions total. Today's session is going to be geared towards fire and life safety. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Mr. Richard Tannehill for his introduction.
Thank you, Caesar. Hello, everyone. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. We're having some technical difficulties right now. So if you can't, go ahead and post a message in the chat and we'll see what we can get it on. It looks like we should be live. So I apologize for that. Anyway, welcome to the 2019 California Building Standards Code update. We're going to be talking about fire life safety today. Before we start, I'll give you a quick OSHPD update of what's going on with the coronavirus. Get a lot of questions if we're still working. We do have our reviewers still continuing to review plans. Your projects are still going through and are still being reviewed. Most people are working from home and they do not have all the same equipment that we do here. So you may experience a little bit of delays in getting your projects back. But other than that, we've been working with the Health and Human Services Agency and the governor's office, trying to help them with getting temporary facilities up and running. And but other than that, we're business as usual, just may see some delays. So as we get started here, this is the cycle for the 2019 code adoption. It's actually, they call it the 2018, but it's for the 2019 code that we have. You can see that we are right at 2020, January of 2020. Let me get my pointer on here. Oops, there we go. So you should see the, we had January 1st, we went live with the 2019 code, and we are effectively working on the intervening cycle currently, but the 2019 is in effect. It was printed back in July, and now it is in full effect. We're in, what, April now, so we're right on time, actually, with this seminar. Actually, we're a few months behind, but we have been doing these updates throughout the state since January, and actually even a little bit last year. So we're just moving forward and continuing with the education process in this. So what we did, we took the International Building Code, took the 2016 California Building Code with the California amendments, and rolled that into any new updates that OSHPD was going to add, and that gave us our 2019 Building Code. So today we're going to be talking about fire life safety. Like Caesar mentioned, this is a 4-session series, and last 2 weeks ago we did part 10 and part 1 of the building code. Today we're in part 9, and then in 2 weeks I'll be back for part 2 of the building code changes, and then we'll be coming back in the final week with parts 3, 4, and 5 for electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and energy. Okay, here's the schedule for the future sessions. And I just want to remind you, a lot of you now, originally this was going to be done with a lot of offices showing this presentation in their conference rooms. With the change in situations, a lot of people are logging on individually from home. Just want to remind you that each person does have to register individually. You can't just do an office registration and have everyone sign in. So everyone has to register individually, and you do have to register for each session individually. So we'll be taking questions. Just go ahead and enter them into your chat box or question box, whatever you have, and we will be compiling them and answering them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Nancy, who's our Chief Fire Life Safety Officer, Nancy Timmons. and she will take it from here.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, could you turn off the your laser, please? I can't control my mouse with that. Okay. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you again for attending this webinar. With this portion of it for the fire life safety changes is actually just a fraction of the whole presentation that I have. I've got a 288-page presentation for the changes within the building code and a similar size presentation for the fire code. So you're just getting the short and sweet version of it. So again, thank you for listening to this. And if you have questions, you run into something that you haven't, that I didn't present today that you're seeing in the code, just give me a call, email me, ask me about it. That's fine. Because like I said, there's a lot here, or a lot that's not here actually, that is on the other presentations, but those are, I'd say, minimal. These are the significant changes. So with that, thank you for your help, for those of you that are helping keep these facilities going and working from home. Rest assured, I can't see you in your joggers and fleece, but hope you're comfy, because you know, reading code is exciting. So let's start with this. So starting at the beginning, building planning, chapters 3 through 6, not a lot of changes in 3 through 6, but in 407.2.1, talking about weighting in similar areas. So 407.2 is the section for corridor continuity and separation, and then 407.2.1 talks about what areas can be open to the corridor. So this change isn't a change in enforcement. It is just cleaning up the language a little bit, and you'll see that a lot today, a lot of cleanup that has happened with the code. So what we struck out public use areas or group meetings from the old code language, because public use areas, that's kind of vague, and group meeting areas are defined elsewhere. That's not really what the waiting area is supposed to be like. So new language reads, waiting areas and similar spaces constructed as required for corridors shall be permitted to be open to the corridor only where all the following criteria are met. And then you've got the 5 items that have to be in place in order to have the waiting areas open to the corridor. Those 5 items have not changed. So just a little cleanup of this language. You know, that's what it looks like. More cleanup. So this is also, we've moved language so that it makes more sense on where the location is. So in in the 2016 edition of the code, the code had you kind of bouncing back and forth from language in chapter 4, language in chapter 10. So we've just cleaned this up a little bit, put issues in the proper areas so you don't have to go searching all over. So again, this is not new enforcement. This section here, 407.421, talking about 2 means of egress. It just makes it clear that this section is talking about rooms. When you have a typical rated corridor situation, the rooms off that corridor, and separates it from the requirements that are in place for the exiting and number of exits that you need for suites. So again, this is for rooms. It's when you need 2 means of egress. Any sleeping room of more than 1,000 square feet shall have no fewer than 2 exit access doors from the sleeping room located in accordance with 10.071. Any room other than sleeping rooms with an area of more than 2,500 square feet shall have no fewer than 2 exit access doors from the room located in accordance with 10.071. So we just separate the two. So the first portion, you've got this, if you have a sleeping room and it's more than 1,000 square feet, it needs 2 exits. And then if you have another room that is not a sleeping room, and it's more than 2,500 square feet, that needs 2 exits. So when you look at this, when would this operating room need 2 means of egress? This is not a sleeping room, so it would be 2 exits would be required when this operating room was more than 2,500 square feet. And again, part of that same cleanup is separating the requirements for rooms that are off a corridor system versus suites. So this section, sleeping room, was struck out so that it now reads any care suite that contains sleeping rooms of more than 1,000 square feet shall have no fewer than 2 exit access doors from the care suite located in accordance with 1007. So this is telling you that when you have a care suite and there are sleeping rooms in that care suite, if that care suite is more than 1,000 square feet, you need 2 exits. There's a new definition in the code, a new terminology in the code, non-patient care suites. So this is good, and it's in line with NFPA 101. And this is defined as, in group I2 or 2.1 occupancies, a group of rooms or spaces within a suite for use as administrative, business, and professional offices. So that's specific. So if you have these non-patient care suites, the use is only for administrative, business, and professional offices. So, you know, some people used to think that pharmacies had to be suites. That's not accurate anymore with the terminology in the code. That wouldn't fall under this. Again, these non-patient care suites are just for business, admin, and professional offices. And then, of course, there are requirements for these suites. The entire building has to be fully sprinklered in order to have these suites. The suites are limited to 10,000 square feet in size. And of course, they'll have a fire barrier around it. So here is the code language that goes with this new terminology. Group I2 and 2.1 non-patient care suites, the means of egress provisions for non-patient care suites shall be in accordance with the primary use and occupancy of the suite. So what's that saying? That's saying it's a B. So the inside of that suite, they get the exiting that a B would have. And then separation, non-patient care suites shall be separated from other portions of the building, including other suites, by not less than a 1-hour fire barrier complying with 707, and then each suite of rooms shall be separated from the remainder of the building by not less than a 1-hour fire barrier. So it needs a 1-hour fire barrier around the suite. If it's adjoining other suites, you need a 1-hour fire barrier around each suite so that they're separated. And then the area, again, limited to 10,000 square feet, and a fully sprinklered building. There is language in the model code that allows smoke compartments to be larger than what NFPA 101 does and what we do. So we struck out model code language. Again, not new regulations. It's the smoke compartment sizes shall be not more than 22,500 square feet. So that hasn't changed. What changed was that model code changed it. So we did not adopt that language. We kept our language, 22,500 square feet. And as you can see underneath the parts that are struck out, you'll see condition 2. Model code back in 2016 introduced condition 1 and condition 2 to I2 occupancies. We did not adopt those conditions, and at that time we struck those out. The reason I'm bringing that up is because we've got a lot of publisher errors in the code this edition. And when we make the changes and back in the 2016 struck out those conditions, that's supposed to carry over to the 2019 edition. That didn't happen everywhere. So you may see, as you're reading through the code, you may see condition 1 or condition 2 mentioned in a few spaces. We don't adopt those. An I2 is an I2. We don't have those conditions. So we're fixing that with our erratas, but you might still see it. But just for a heads up there, we don't adopt those conditions. This is not a new section either, but it's been added to. So this section 40726 is for nursing home cooking facilities. Back in 2016, Model Code introduced domestic cooking allowed domestic cooking into nursing homes. So this is for SNFs only, and this is to make the SNF more home-like and have a place to help residents come out and have a place to get out of their rooms and visit with people. So in 2016, model code said these areas could be open to the corridor. California definitely did not adopt that. They can have these domestic cooking spaces, but they cannot be open to the corridor, because with 86% of fires or so starting in kitchens, we said, yeah, that's not really a good idea to have that open to the corridor. So they can have these spaces, just not open to the corridor. The items that have to be in place, the first 6 have not changed. So to have these areas, the number of care recipients housed in the smoke compartment is not greater than 30. 2, the number of care recipients served by the cooking facility is not greater than 30. Only 1 cooking facility area is permitted in a smoke compartment. And 4, the types of domestic cooking appliances permitted shall be limited to ovens, cooktops, ranges, warmers, and microwaves. And 5, the new 5, we struck out Model Code 5. So California Building Code number 5, the space containing the domestic cooking facility shall be arranged so as not to obstruct access to the required exit. And 6, the domestic cooking hoods installed and constructed in accordance with mechanical code shall be provided over the cooktops and ranges. If you're familiar with this section, you'll say, oh, why are you reading this? This isn't new. Just to refresh your memory. What is new are these numbers here. Number 7, so this is all what they have to have in place in order to have these domestic cooking spaces. Number 7, cooktops and ranges shall be protected in accordance with 90413. I'll go over that in a minute. 8, a shutoff for the fuel and electrical power supply to the cooking equipment shall be provided in a location that's accessible only to staff, so they need the shutoff for the gas and power. Number 9, a timer shall be provided that automatically deactivates the cooking appliances within a period of not more than 120 minutes. So if it's on for 2 hours and no one paid attention to it, it shuts itself off. And then 10, the portable extinguisher within 30 feet. Here's what that would look like. So again, it's a space that they can have this space not open to the corridor, but they can have this space. And again, it's to bring them out, make it more home-like, so they're not just stuck in their rooms all the time. So it needs, in the course of number 7, an automatic fire extinguishing system, which I will go over in a minute. And it's domestic equipment only. And a hood is required. Obviously, the exits can't be obstructed. And you need the fire extinguisher and the separation from the corridor. I know, like I said that 5 times, but there's a reason. So yes, it has to be separated. The equipment is limited again to ovens, cooktops, ranges, warmers, and microwaves. So it's not a commercial oven. It's just this equipment. So 90413, that's the section that number 7 said it has to be in compliance with. What is that? That section reads that domestic cooking systems, cooktops, and ranges installed in the following occupancies shall be protected. So look, number 2 says I2 and 2.1, where these are permitted, need to be protected. So then that's the charging section. And then it leads you to 90413.1. That again tells you this needs to be protected in accordance with either 90413.1.1 or 13.1.2. So 2 options. Number 1 is 90413.1.1 is that the domestic recirculating or exterior vented cooking hood provided over the cooktop or range shall be equipped with an approved automatic fire extinguishing system complying with the following. So they need the extinguishing system. This is option 1. Number 1, what type? It's a UL 300A. So they'll need a UL 300A system. Number 2, the manual actuation of the fire extinguisher system shall be provided. So they need the manual pull that goes with this. And then 3, interconnection of the fuel and electrical power supply shall be in accordance with 90412.2. So they need again, the fuel and power shut off. So this option is what they would use if they had a gas range. UL 300A It is not equivalent to a UL 300 system. So if they have this domestic system, and it's a gas, they have the UL 300A, the manual pull, shut off of fuel and electrical power. So again, 300A is not equivalent to UL 300. And then the second option, 904.13.1.2, it reads, cooktops and ranges shall include burners that have been tested and listed to prevent ignition of cooking oils with burners turned on to their max heat setting and allowed to operate for 30 minutes. So this is going to be for the electric ranges. Obviously, that test wouldn't be, might be kind of fun, but it wouldn't work. They wouldn't pass very well if it was gas, right? You're turning up the burner till its max setting and then allowing it to be that way for 30 minutes and then putting oil on it. So the electric ranges need this, and that they would comply, that test is UL 858. So they have to comply with UL 858. And as you can read here, as of April 2019, all electric ranges have to comply with this. So all the ranges sold after that have to comply with this requirement. So again, the gas ranges, UL 300A, and the appropriate items that go with that, and the electric would have to meet this test requirement. All right, new section, or not new section, new piece of a section in the code under smoke compartments. Talking about independent egress. This section was added to make it clear that if a smoke compartment does not have an exit, then it shall be provided with direct access to not less than 2 adjacent smoke compartments. So there's your 3 main components of your means of egress, right? Your exit access, your exit discharge. An example of an exit would be an interior exit enclosure, like your stair. So if your smoke compartment does not have an actual exit, it needs access to 2 adjacent smoke compartments because you don't want a dead end smoke compartment. So reading that, a means of egress shall be provided from each smoke compartment created by smoke barriers without having to return through the smoke compartment which means of egress originated. That's old language, that hasn't changed. What is new is smoke compartments that do not contain an exit shall be provided with direct access to not less than 2 adjacent smoke compartments. Again, this is consistent with 101, NFPA 101. These are examples of non-compliant conditions. So look at the top one. Smoke compartment 2 does not have an exit. It has access to smoke compartment 1, so they can relocate over there, which is great. But if there's a fire in smoke compartment 1 and those occupants all go to smoke compartment 2, they have nowhere to go. They can't get out if that fire continues. And then similarly, on the bottom example on number 2, smoke compartment 3 would not comply. It has access to smoke compartment 2, so they can relocate over there. But again, if there's a fire in smoke compartment 2, half of the occupants go to 1, the other half go to 3. The people in 3 cannot get out if they don't have an exit. So hopefully that makes sense. Ask me later if it doesn't. This is another cleanup. Table 504.3 is the types of the construction type that you can have for the different occupancies. The 2016 publisher error did not put not permitted for type 3B and 5B construction, so we fixed that. So it was incorrect in the 2016. So again, this is corrected. It states that these types of construction are not permitted for I2 and 2.1 occupancies. Accessory occupancies. 508 is a section that talks about mixed use and occupancies. And within the section, there's really 4 pieces, but 3 main pieces. You've got accessory spaces, separated spaces, and non-separated spaces. Non-separated spaces doesn't really happen with I2s because of the language in there that tells you it's either going to be separated or accessory. So some language that was changed in the accessory portion is cleaned up a little bit. So it's another one that's it's not new enforcement, it's just cleaned up. So the charging section is going to tell you that no separation is required between accessories and the main occupancy. And then there are exceptions, And exception number 3 says, in group I2 and 2.1, those shall be separated from all other occupancies in accordance with 5084. 5084 is the section for separated occupancies. That's where you go to the table, you got an A and an I, you need 2 hours, separate it per that. Then this exception continues on. No separation is required between group B, E, R2 sleeping units, and S2 occupancies accessory to I2 and I2.1. So what do you need in order to be considered accessory as opposed to separated? Accessory, you have 2 things: ancillary to the main use, it's related to the main use, and that area that you're looking at does not, that type of use does not exceed 10% of the floor area, square footage of the floor, of that floor. So you have a B, for example, and you're in a sleeping unit and there's a nurse manager's office up there, and it's just one office, and it's one little B. This section is what that's talking about. You don't need to separate that B from the rest of the floor. And same if you had a doctor's sleeping unit. It's an R2, it's on that space, it's accessory to that I2, you would not need to separate it. But keep in mind the 10% limitations. So you have to count all the Bs on the whole floor. And if you have a remodel, for example, you're changing this nurse manager's office, you're changing this into a B. It was something else before. But adding that manager's office now just took all the Bs on that floor over 10% of that floor area. Something's got to be separated. Makes sense to separate where you're working, but if it's easier to separate something else, separate another B. Just bring it back down to less than 10%. A lot of explanation for that easy section. Again, if you have questions, let me know. You could saw that an S2 was in there. Porte-cocheres are considered an S2. The S2 was intended for small storage closets, like a janitor's closet, you know, a use such as that you'd see on the patient floor that wouldn't need to be separated. However, porte-cocheres are considered S2s, so it falls under that. We still use our can. We've got a can for porte-cocheres at this moment in time. Still use that can, but I am looking at changing that can where to follow more in suit with this, as opposed to changing the code, because that was an unintended consequence of the change to this code. So what we're looking at is when the S2, when the porte-cochere is accessory to the I, what do we do with that? The can's going to tell you different scenarios. Is it used just for patient drop-off? Is it used for an ambulance, delivery trucks? And the conditions change with that. Excuse me. So I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll be babbling too long about that. So I'll use the can now. That hasn't changed. Still use the can for porte-cocheres, and I'll keep you posted if anything changes with that. This section is really kind of don't need it because it's talking about the non-separated occupancies. And like I mentioned before, for I2s, you're either going to fall under accessory or separated. But model code has language in 508312 that leads you to believe you can use this. In California, you don't use it. We don't have condition 2. So when you have your mixed uses, you're either going to fall under the accessory space or separated. Or the fourth one that I hinted at, the incidental use, falls into play there. But non-separated isn't, you're not going to use that. 601, table 601, note B. The note, the intent, again, this is another cleanup. The enforcement of this has not changed. They just tried to make it clear that this is the footnote that talks about when the roof construction is 20 feet or more above any floor, then if the table tells you protection is needed, if you have this condition, this footnote saying, except in these occupancies, you don't need to protect it. What they cleaned up was including primary structural frame members. Because before, when it's talking about roof framing and decking, it wasn't clear to some people that also included the primary structural frame members that did not have to be protected. But read through that carefully. So there's footnote B and footnote B1. So footnote B says except in F1, H, M, and S1 occupancies. So you don't get to use this exception for those. And then when you go to B1, oh, sorry, let me show you the picture first. So you've got the picture of the structural members. That footnote again is making it clear that those don't have to be protected when you have that condition. And then the footnote B1 starts with, except in A, E, F1, H, I, L, M, R1, R2, R21, and S1 occupancies, and high rises, and then other SFM occupancies, you don't get to use that either. So really an easier way would have been to say, in B, F2, S2 occupancies, and U occupancies, you can use this exception. So again, the enforcement hasn't changed. They just tried to make the language clearer, but there's so many occupancies that are exempted from it. You're just left with a few that can actually use that footnote. All right, Chapter 7, 7 through 9, fire protection. Yay, fun stuff. So this section is new. The language is new, but what you've been doing has probably been, hopefully, in line with this section. So it's one of those unwritten, well, now it's written. It used to be one of those unwritten codes. You've got secondary members attached to the primary structural members that need to be protected. How far out do you protect these? Well, now it's in code 12 inches, but there's a couple more pieces to this. So where primary and secondary structural steel members require fire protection, secondary attachments to those structural members shall be protected with the same fire-resistive material and thickness as required for the structural member. The protection shall extend away from the structural member a distance of not less than 12 inches, so protect it 12 inches out, or shall be applied to the entire length when the attachment is less than 12 inches long. Go figure. The attachment's not 12 inches, it's less than that, protect the whole thing. And then the last part, when an attachment is hollow and the ends are open, the fire-resistive material and thickness shall be applied to both the exterior and interior of the hollow steel attachment. Makes sense, right? You've got this hollow member attached to structural members that have to be fire protected. If you've got a hollow member, you essentially have a little chimney in there, so and a little space to transmit the heat to. So this is telling you that when it's hollow and both ends are open, in the interior of that hollow member and the exterior both have to be protected in the same manner and thickness as the structural member. There's a visual for you. And first, you have to look at that corridor. That's like the best corridor, right? It's clean and it's clear. But anyways, this section that this is talking about, 70951, is another one that is not new in enforcement. It just somehow disappeared from the code for like 10 years. So 70951, this is talking about cross corridor doors and smoke barriers. When you have cross corridor doors and the smoke barrier, that they need to be opposite swinging. You might not have known that was missing, but that was missing in the language of the code. It was there actually it's been more than, so it's was there in 2007 and then disappeared, so we put it back. So the charging section has not changed. What we've added again, where is in group I2, where swinging doors are installed across the corridor, such doors shall be opposite swinging doors. Again, not new, just put back. It disappeared somewhere. This section of 71653, this again is not new enforcement. It's just language to make it clear that when you have, why don't we read it? 71653. Fire door assemblies required to have a minimum fire protection rating of 20 minutes where located in corridor walls or smoke barrier walls, having a fire resistance rating in accordance with 71612 shall be tested in accordance with NFPA 252 or 10C without the hose stream test. So there's an exception. So what that charging section is saying is when you have a rated corridor for the fire partition or a smoke barrier, the door has to be 20 minutes. And then there's an exception that ties you back into 40731. Corridor door assemblies and occupancies of group I2 and 2-1 in fully sprinkler buildings shall be in accordance with 40731. So again, this is not new for enforcement. This is talking about when you have, so the charging section says your doors have to be rated when they're in a rated corridor. But then in 40731, it says certain doors in the corridor don't have to be rated, like your patient room doors and certain offices, but patient room doors don't have to be rated. What some people have been missing for the years that it's been in there is that is only okay if the entire building is fully sprinklered. So if the building is not fully sprinklered, it's one of the old buildings, those patient room doors and those doors mentioned in 40731 still have to be rated. So this is just making it clear that you can only have the non-rated doors in accordance with 40731 if the entire building is fully sprinklered. Another, on the line of corridors and dampers, if you've been around for a while, you've probably had fun figuring out what in the world is Chapter 7 talking about when it comes to fire dampers and smoke dampers. And it's changed and it's been cleaned up and changed and cleaned up. So here's another change for you. I want to keep up with the times. So historically what happened is Model Code took away ratings for corridors in I2s. California did not adopt that. We kept our corridors rated, but what happened in the process was some disconnect with the code of dampers and which kind of dampers are required. So the section that I'm talking about now, 717.541, is talking about smoke dampers in corridors that are rated. So you have another section that's going to talk about where fire dampers are. That stayed the same. That hasn't changed. So what has changed is this language here for AE, H, I, L, and R occupancies, high-rise buildings, and other SFM facilities. A listed smoke damper designed to resist the passage of smoke shall also be provided at each point a duct or air transfer opening penetrates a fire resistance rated corridor, required to have smoke and draft doors in accordance with 716.221. So that main part didn't change. So if you're in a rated corridor and within that corridor are doors that are required to be smoke and draft control doors, then smoke dampers were needed in the ducts that penetrate that corridor. What was added is this last part. Doors that provide an effective barrier to limit the transfer of smoke in accordance with 40731. So what is that saying? That section we just talked about that said if your building's fully sprinklered, your I2 is fully sprinklered, and you have the patient room doors that are not rated, they are required to limit the transfer of smoke. So those types of doors. This section is about those types of doors. So when you have a corridor where those types of doors are required, this is saying you need a smoke damper. But don't freak out. It's okay. The exceptions are still there. So the exceptions that say unless there's no opening to the corridor, and if the thickness of the duct steel is not less than 0.019. So this is saying you need those smoke dampers. If there are openings in the corridor, you still need fire smoke dampers. And if that steel thickness is not as indicated in the code, you would need the smoke damper in addition to the fire damper, so fire smoke dampers. Hopefully that's clear. You've heard us talking about the past couple of years, changes in interior floor finish for areas where patients are restrained. The old code used to say, and the forever used to say, only non-combustible flooring was permitted. So changes in 804 have been made to will lead you to it, to let you see that there's more. You can use other flooring. So the charging section says that interior floor finish and floor coverings, this is for all occupancies, that it shall comply with 8042 to 80442. But then there's an exception. In areas except groups I2 with detention and I3s, the floor finishes and coverings of a traditional type, such as wood, vinyl, linoleum, or terrazzo, and resilient floor covering materials that are not comprised of fibers. What did that just say? It says in most occupancies, only the carpet is regulated, and the following sections will say how that carpet has to be tested and regulated. This is one of them. This is the test requirements for that. That hasn't changed other than adding, well, that hasn't changed. At the very end, you have to see, it tells you to go see 80443 when you're dealing with the flooring in the I2 with restraint on the I3s. We're not there yet. We're at 80442. That's talking about carpeting again and the requirements that the carpeting has to meet. But as you can see here, that's underlined. It's sending you again to to 80443 when you're dealing with locked I2s and I3s. Go to that. So what is that telling you? All these sections are telling you there's something more specific for locked I2s and I3s in 80443. No matter where the flooring is, this is talking about carpet in certain areas. So when you finally get there, the wording probably looks familiar to you. We just kind of shuffled it up a little bit to make the charging section the allowance, the exception. So interior floor finish and floor coverings occupied by inmates or patients whose personal liberties are restrained shall be non-combustible. So charging section says the flooring is non-combustible, but the exception, carpet or other floor covering materials may be used in areas protected by an automatic sprinkler system installed throughout. Carpet or other floor covering shall comply with the requirements of ASTME 648. And then the minimum critical radiant flux shall be not less than class 1, and then the rest of the requirements. So what this is saying is that you can have, if the building is not fully sprinklered, you still have to have non-combustible flooring. If the building is fully sprinklered, which it has to be if you're going to have locked people in it, if the building is fully sprinklered, you can have not less than class 1 critical radiant flux flooring. So it gives you an option of not just non-combustible, but you can use this other flooring as long as it meets all of these requirements and it's not less than class 1 critical radiant flux. For fire alarm section of the code, we added an exception to 90751. That charging section indicates pre-signal features are allowed when approved by the building code official. We have an exception to that. That's basically telling you we don't allow that. A pre-signal feature shall not be permitted to be installed in a group I2, 2-1, or R2-1 occupancy. So you cannot have a pre-signal device in the I2. And what is a pre-signal device? That is, it alerts someone else before alerting the occupants of the building, and an individual will have to go see what's happening and then activate the alarm if the alarm is required. So we do not allow that, and you can think about this section when you're looking at the supervisories for duct detectors. We do not allow duct detectors to go to supervisory. Duct detectors have to be in alarm condition. This is one of those sections used for that. We are changing the code to make that clearer, because there are sections of code that say that duct detectors can be supervisory. We're changing that to make it clear that no, we don't, and it's a timing thing. If that duct detector goes off, and it's basically somebody's got to pre-signal, right? Somebody's got to go check, see is it valid, and then go activate the alarm. There's too much time has gone by where if it is real, patients should have already been starting to relocate. So we do not allow that. This section is somehow everywhere. I just brought up the duct detector because that's been part of my world a lot lately, so I'm just sharing that with you. In a little bit of language has changed, or again been a little clearer about emergency voice communication systems for fire alarms. In the high-rise buildings and in I2s that have occupied floors more than 75 feet above the lowest level of fire department vehicle access, 907-213 requires an emergency voice alarm communication system. So that isn't new, but what we've done is coordinated different sections. So 907-522, coordinate that with 907-213. What is that all saying? That's let me go down here. that part hasn't changed. So when you have in an I2, so your audible alarms are required, or audible appliances shall be used in non-patient areas, right? And then there's this exception that says when you don't use those audibles, a visual alarm is provided, and visual appliances are allowed to be used in lieu of audible appliances in patient-occupied areas. So what this section is saying is when you use those visuals, instead of, in lieu of the audibles, the emergency voice communication system has to be activated to tell the other occupants in the building. That has been, as I've read, it's the high-rise I2s, but this is also, now it's coordinating it so it's in any I2. So in group I2 and 2-1 occupancies where in accordance with 907525, audible fire alarm notification devices are not provided, where the visuals are provided in lieu of the audible. Upon receipt of an alarm at a constantly attended location, a general occupant notification shall be broadcast over the public address system. Excuse me. There we go. So that's 90725 is the one that allows the visuals in the patient-occupied areas in lieu of audible. And again, just to make it clear, this is for, the one section is talking about high-rises. The other section is saying all I2s. So this, just to make it clear, when you are using visuals in lieu of audibles, you have to have an emergency voice communication system to notify the occupants and other staff. And that's the other coordinating section. And that has to be tied to the life safety branch of the essential electrical system, and that would be per CEC 51732. This is just the coordinating. Oh no, it's not. I take that back. I'm not there yet. Opening protection. This is about smoke barrier doors, and we struck out self-closing devices. You probably saw a lot of that in the 2016 code. So just talking about doors and smoke barriers. Openings and smoke barriers shall be protected by auto closing devices actuated by the required controls for the mechanical smoke control system. Door openings shall be protected by fire door assemblies complying with 716. So this is telling you that those doors have to be on auto closers, not self-closing anymore. So that part, the auto closing, isn't new. What's new is they're not allowed to be not self-closing doors anymore. So makes sense for when you just have cross corridor doors in a corridor that are smoke barrier, on the smoke barrier wall. Those are held open with your mags released by the smokes and they close. But what if you have a smoke barrier door that has a soiled utility room along that wall that is shared with the incidental use, the fire barrier wall? What happens with that door? That door's got to be self-closing, right? Because it's soiled utility room. But this is saying it has to be on auto closing. So this is just watch out for this and the design and how you're designing the building and what you're putting on that smoke barrier wall. That's going to make it more difficult if you have those other types of rooms. Like this is the one that's just coordinating with the section I already read about 70951, where you have cross corridor doors in the smoke barrier. They have to be opposite swinging. There's a section in the fire code that wasn't in place, and a section they flip-flopped. One section was in place in the building code, one section was in place in the building code, but they weren't. Both sections weren't in place in both codes. So what we did was just clean that up so that it's coordinated now. In 70951 says if they're cross corridors opposite, they have to be opposite swinging, and then 909531 just matches that requirement. And means of egress, Chapter 10. This is part of that cleanup that we talked about with Chapter 4, that when do you need two means of egress? In tables 100621, that's telling you based off of occupant load and common path of travel when two means of egress are needed. This exception number 2 is to make it clear that for rooms and care suites, go to 4074 because there are more specific requirements there. And then also footnote D in that same section, 100621, tells you to go to 4074 for travel distance limitations and the number of exits and exit access requirements. So just make sure that for those types of areas, so that you go to 407. It's more specific over there. This section is another one that for years, is for those of you who deal with CMS and 101 and the back and forth of about 15 years ago, do you need to illuminate your exit discharge through the public way or not? They went back and forth for a while, put it in the code. Now we have it in the code so that it matches, that your illumination for your exiting, it has to be lit up through to the public way. Or as this section says, if they don't go to a public way, they go to a safe dispersal area, then it goes through to that safe dispersal area. So again, means of egress lighting has to be lit from the exit discharge through to the public way or to this safe dispersal area. And if it goes to the safe dispersal area, the illumination in that area is not less than 1 foot candle in order to go here. So there's what it looks like from your exit discharge, your exterior exit door, all the way through to the public way. It has to be lit up. And then it's also on emergency power. So model code didn't have that. We added that to 100832, that when you're required to have that lighting, and that lighting is required to be tied to the emergency power. So careful with the types of lighting used outside. So you've got 10 seconds, right, from the power outage till the generator kicks in. That lighting has to be at the minimum allowed at that 10 seconds. So if you've got that lighting that slowly ramps up to the full brightness and it takes 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever it takes, that won't comply. It has to be at the minimum lumens allowed at 10 seconds. This section is talking about still the emergency lighting, and if you have a ballast that has 2 light bulbs in it, that's where you're getting your emergency lighting from, and that ballast loses a bulb. The bulb burns out. One bulb has to provide the minimum lighting, is basically what this is saying. So if you're doing your calc, so you're figuring out your lighting for emergency lighting, and you're looking at a ballast and it has two bulbs on it, and you're counting both those bulbs to reach your minimum, that won't work, because if one of those bulbs burns out, that other one has to carry that full lighting. Just a visual for you. So again, if one fails, the other still has to provide the minimum. Size of doors, another cleanup code section. Model code allows projections on certain doors. We have an exception that in a group I2 or 2-1 occupancy, there shall be no projections into the clear width of doors used for the movement of beds and stretcher patients in the means of egress. So again, the charging section says you can have these projections between 34 and 80 inches. Exception says nope, not in I2 for the doors that are used for bed and stretcher. That you have the 44 clear, so you have no projections. So usually that's where your hardware comes into play. Corridor construction. This is just one of those sections apparently is needed to make the obvious more obvious. So in this section is telling you 1020.1 that corridor shall be fire resistance rated in accordance with table 1020.1. Well, in suites, we call those spaces in suites that look like corridors, we call those corridors. But what this number 6 is telling you, that in those types of areas where the suite is protected as it's supposed to be, with the fire barrier around the suite, the corridor within that suite doesn't need a rating. It's here, you know what it looks like. So that's just making it clear that when you have a corridor within the suite, that corridor does not have to be rated. And that was some confusion back because when the old code language changed, when you had all the different aisles and hallways and corridors and what was what do we call it when it's in a suite? We call it a corridor. It's a non-rated corridor. It's in the suite. This section is the section for what type of penetrations are permitted in an exit enclosure, an interior exit stairway, interior exit ramp, your exit enclosure. So the main part of it hasn't changed, but they've added a couple items and they numbered it to make it a little more clear what's permitted. And so penetrations into or through, so read that carefully because that's really talking about your membrane too, right? Penetrations into or through interior exit stairways and ramps are prohibited except for the following. 1, equipment and ductwork necessary for independent ventilation or pressurization. That's not new. They cleaned up number 2, just call it sprinkler piping and standpipes. That's called fire protection system. Just call it what it is. 3, they've added security systems, and then 4, two-way communication systems. And then 5 and 6 haven't changed. 5, electrical raceway for fire department communication systems, and then 6, electrical raceways serving the interior of the stair and ramp and have to terminate at the steel box not exceeding 16 square inches. So a lot of you are like, yay, we can put our security cameras in here and the two-way communication. Yes, you can have those penetrations. Keep in mind the intent of the code though. Why are there these limitations for those penetrations? You're maintaining that integrity of your stair, and you're limiting the number of points smoke can enter that exit stair, or as we're going to read in a minute, the exit passageway. So yes, these items are allowed, but keep the intent in mind while you're designing. It doesn't need to come in on every single floor. It can come in on one floor, go up a few, and then bring in another one. It doesn't need to come in and out on every floor. You want to limit the number of penetrations there. 1024.6 is the matching section of what we just read, but for exit passageways. So the language here was changed to match that. So those same penetrations that are permitted in an interior exit stair are permitted in an exit passageway with the same intent in mind. So what's it telling you? It's okay now to have the cameras and then the penetrations for the two-way communication. But again, keep the intent in mind. Limit the number of penetrations. Come in on the floor, go up, and then I know there are requirements with how much wiring you can have from a electrical room to the source. So use it to the maximum there. All right. Building services, special devices, and special conditions. We're mainly going to talk about elevators in here. And sorry, my hesitation. I'm trying to decide how long I go into this one. So there's some confusion, and there has been some confusion with elevators and when sprinklers are required, when they're not required, when can you take them out. So in today's code, right now, as it's written with no changes, sprinklers are required in the hoistways in I2s because of section 903.2.6. 903.2.6 is the section that indicates I2s have to be fully sprinklered. That's the section that's the most stringent of all the others. So you'll see in 903.3.1.1.1 that section says you can take out sprinklers in certain areas, but it starts with in other than I2, 2, 1, and I3. So you're back to 903.2.6 where sprinklers are required in I2s. And then you say, well, wait a minute, what about chapter 30 and 30.05? That says I can take my sprinklers out if I put these other items in place. Kind of. What that section, State Fire Marshal's cleaning that section up. That section was intended for machineless room elevators. So the elevators where the machine is on that cab or in that same hoistway as the elevator, where it doesn't have a separate machinery room. Kind of like when similar to like the Gen 2 type elevator. So you've got that machinery right in the hoistway. That section was meant for those type of elevators because those types of elevator that machinery for those types of elevators. It's mainly non-combustible, but there are still some pieces that, even if they're non-combustible, there's the smoke development of, like, the belts, for example, is high. So what their intent was when you have those types of elevators, you could take the sprinkler out if you put these other 6 items into place. So that is, again, that section 30 is used for just those machineless room type elevators. That's when you have that section. So what we are allowing right now, so let me get to the point here, what we're allowing at OSHPD, and with the State Fire Marshal's blessing, because we can't cherry pick the code, as you know, so I'm changing the code for sprinklers in hoistways to match the rest of the country, but that's not in place yet. That's going to be, it should be in the mid-cycle 2019. So right now, today's code, sprinklers are required in the hoistways, but we are allowing AMCs. And the AMC is going to be, there's one of 2 AMCs or language that you're going to have to use for the AMC. If you have a elevator that has a separate machinery room, so it's not machineless room, you have a separate machinery room and the hoistway, and you want to take those sprinklers out, you do an AMC based off of using the sections that I mentioned, 903.2.6, 903.3.1.1.1, and then 3006.2. That section is the section that references the reference standards. In the reference standards, ASTM A17, there's one little blurb in there that says it is the owner, basically, not verbatim here, that it's the owner's responsibility to train the operators of that cab of how to use it. So backing up, why were we keeping sprinklers and I2s in the hoistways? It's because of Code Blue. Other occupancies don't have Code Blue, so the code wasn't addressing that. Code Blue functions just like the firefighter function. The difference being the staff operating the elevator under Code Blue conditions do not have the same knowledge as firefighters, such as don't open the door on this floor. And you could see that could be a very bad thing. So we've kept the sprinklers in there for that reason. But there are more studies have shown that actually there are more deaths from people falling in the hoistways than actually from fire or smoke in the hoistways. So that's why nationwide, that's why the code has changed model code wise. Take those sprinklers out, because by putting those sprinklers in there, you need heat, you need smokes, you need people in there maintaining them, and that was more hazardous. So take you back again. Sorry, that was hard to follow on the phone, but that 3002, excuse me, 30, I gave you the wrong section there. Sorry about that. 3001.3 is the section for referencing the reference standards. That's the section that gives us the, okay, well, legally we should be covered there. So if you have a sprinkler in your elevator and you want to take it out, give us an AMC. If all that stuff that I just talked about didn't make sense, we'll explain it to you. And we have some example writing we could show you, because it gets confusing. What this section with that 300541, the section that's talking about the elevators, the machineless room elevators, they added in here, no materials unrelated to the elevator equipment are permitted to be stored in the elevator machinery rooms, machinery spaces, control rooms, and control spaces, or elevator hoistways. What that's saying is if you have the machineless room type elevators and you're not, and you're taking the sprinkler out and you're complying with those 6 other items instead, part of those 6 items is no storage is permitted in those spaces unless it's related to the elevator. And then reference standards, chapter 35, the amendments, a couple amendments that we made to NFPA 13 regarding water flow. We require a more current water flow test. NFPA 23211 says that water flow test shall be conducted no more than 12 months prior to the plan submittal. We have amended that to 6. So we need that to 6. And then for the explanatory material, indicates that an alternative means of determining the water supply should be considered when there's a drought or other concerns are present. And then amendments to 72, to 23.81211. Again, making it clear that the positive alarm sequence, the pre-signal type, positive alarm sequence is not permitted in the patient sleeping room. So operation of a patient room smoke detector in I2 and R21 occupancy shall not include a positive alarm sequence feature. It smoke's detected, alarm goes off. It doesn't check what kind of smoke. So a couple items you might have seen, even right here. It says NFPA 72 2016. Why do we adopt that edition? Why don't we have 19? It has to do with when our codes are ready and when the reference standards are ready for print. So the NFPA standards at the time we were writing for 2019 were not approved and ready for print, so we couldn't adopt those next editions. So that's why we're in the 16 editions, not for all of the reference standards, but a chunk of them. So make sure that when you're looking at the reference standards, look in chapter 35, look in chapter 80 of the fire code, make sure you're using the right edition of the reference standard. With that, we will go to questions, and Caesar will be reading these questions.
All right. So thank you for that, Nancy. That was a very informative presentation. But with that being said, we have some questions for you. I hope you're ready to answer some of these some of these are tricky, but we'll try to keep them as general as possible. With that being said, first question, if you're ready, is are the suite requirements for surgery and radiology the same as ICUs?
Suite requirements for, so fire-wise, I'm not sure which requirements you mean, but fire-wise, you're going to need the 1 hour fire barrier around the suite. You've got, oh, you know what, there's a broken code talking about the size of the suites. The size of the suites is, you've got for sleeping room, sleeping suites, non-sleeping suites. You've got those size requirements. Those are all the same, so I'm not certain which you're referring to, but that does bring up a good point. 407.4.4.5.1 is broken, and that should be fixed in an errata. Your care suites are limited. The charging sections in the written code says 7,500 square feet. That was a misprint, publisher's error. That should say 5,000 square feet. And then exception 1, when the building is sprinklered, the care suite can be 7,500. And then exception 2, when it's fully sprinklered and it's fully smoke detected throughout, it can have 10,000 square feet. But I'm not sure the requirements that you're referring to with that question, other than those size requirements, the exiting requirements, and the rating requirements. So it's either going to fall under care suite or sleeping room suite. So if it's not a sleeping room suite, it falls under the regular care suite requirements. And generally, like a PACU, for example, isn't considered a sleeping room. Look at where they get the money from. They don't get the money from that bed as a sleeping bed. So that would be a care suite.
Very good. Thank you for that. Next question, dealing with exiting requirements. What is the significant difference between care and non-care suite? Is it just the exiting requirements, but separation is similar?
For the exiting requirements, if this is in regards to the non-patient care suite, because again, in chapter 407, you have the requirements for suites, and then it breaks it down to sleeping room, suites that have sleeping rooms in it, and suites that have the care suites, like the PACUs, those types. If you're talking about the new one, the non-patient care suite, the exiting for that suite goes with its use. Its use would be a B. So you can have the exiting requirements in that non-patient care suite, the new kind of suite, can meet B exiting requirements.
Very good. Thank you for that. And next question is something that we face very common when we do remodels in an existing facility. Question is, if there is a remodel with an existing smoke compartment that does not comply with the 2009 CBC, is there a % square feet threshold of remodel area that would trigger the egress to be addressed and brought up to current code?
I'm going to assume that 2009 was meant to be 2019 first. And then for egress, so that the section that I just read that I said is broken, 407.4.4.5.1, is talking about the size limitation. So if you're in an old building and remodeling a suite that is not in an area, it's in a building that is not sprinklered, that suite area is going to be limited to 5,000 square feet. So then, of course, the exiting is going to be, it's going to automatically apply with the requirements that are in 19 because they're more, that's for a larger space. But then if you're remodeling and it's in a space that is sprinklered, but without the smoke detection, it can, and then it can be that suite can be 7,500 square feet. And then again, if you're fully smoke detected throughout and fully sprinklered throughout, then that care suite can be increased to 10,000 square feet. So if the space does not comply with current code as far as sprinklers, then they do not get the increase in the size. They have to stick with the old 5,000 square feet.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next pair of questions has to do with corridor doors. So first question is, do all or any pair of doors in corridors have to swing in opposite directions, even if it's not at a smoke or fire barrier? Essentially, doors are for security purposes, right?
Well, some doors are, but so that section that you're probably getting this question from is under smoke, the requirements for smoke barrier doors. When the smoke barrier doors are cross corridor doors, they have to be opposite swinging. If you've got doors, we'll call them just convenience doors, they're not rated, they're not part of the smoke barrier, they're just convenience doors. Those do not have to be opposite swinging, but then a whole bunch of other questions come into play there too. Can one side, how do they operate? We've had people ask, does it have to swing in the direction of polite travel? Like everyone stays to your right. So no, it doesn't. We don't have code for the polite travel. But the section that you're referring to that I was talking about today is under smoke barriers. So those are doors that are part of the smoke barrier. When you have other doors that aren't rated that are in the corridor, those may not have to be. And that's kind of we have to see the setup of that space. I don't want to give a global answer for that because they may need to be cross or opposite swinging based on relocation and based on the space. But say you've got a suite that when you enter, you're walking down the rated corridor and off to your right, there's these double doors that go into a suite. You're technically going, if you go through those doors, you're going through one of those, you're going to a corridor, but like as I mentioned, that would be a non-rated corridor. And in that space, you wouldn't be exiting, you couldn't exit through that from the corridor side. So even though those doors might be smoke barrier and fire barrier doors for the suite, those may not have to be, wouldn't really have to be cross corridor swinging because you're not exiting through that space. They will be relocating to that space or could potentially be relocating to that space, which is different than exiting through it. But when that happens, then all the requirements for the doors dropping, they'll have to be able to get in, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be cross corridor. But that's an example where you wouldn't need it if it was on a smoke barrier. I don't know if that helped or caused more confusion.
Great, thank you. And second question regarding corridor doors is, does a pair of opposite swinging doors, swinging cross corridor doors and a smoke barrier need to be 20-minute rated and have positive latching? It seems like the CBC section 709.5, exception 1, precludes this requirement if all other noted criteria are met.
Okay, good question. So that's another broken code. That is another section that's being fixed in hopefully the erratas. That, yes, they do have to be rated in positive latching. I think that's the one that I'm thinking of that has to be fixed. I was just looking at it yesterday. There's one section, I think that's what you're talking about, that says they don't have to comply with 716 something or other. That section is broken.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is, what is the difference between self-closing and auto-closing doors?
Auto closers are doors that are closed because of something else. So you've got your doors that are held open by your mags, and the door closes once the smoke detector is activated and releases the magnets. That's one example. That's not the only example, but that's one example of an auto closer. Self closer is you're walking out of the bathroom and the door opens into the corridor. That door opens, of course, all the way against the wall, right? You walk through that door and it closes. You know, it's self-closing. Nothing has to happen other than you walking through that door and opening it, and it closes on its own. Does that make sense? Hopefully, maybe to you. If it makes sense to you, Caesar.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That explains it.
You're welcome.
I got two general questions for you. In terms of emergency lighting and the 1 foot candle power measured from where? Is a 1 foot measured from 1 foot above the floor or 6 feet above the finished floor?
From 1 foot from the floor. I believe that's what it actually. I'm saying that without looking that up, but that it's from the floor. And I say that's because you were walking around with our way bent over. I remember with the measuring it, so it's from the floor. Because some people like me don't reach 6 feet above. I can look that up quick, or I can answer more thoroughly later.
It's okay. We can come back to that. We can come back to that. No problem. I have another general question for you, though.
I'm sorry. It's from the floor, but I don't like to say that without giving a section. So, the walking. Well, no, there's one says walking surface, but it is from the floor. But to give you a code section, I'd have to find that.
Yeah, it's okay. We can post the answer to that question later, so we can keep moving through these questions. We got some pretty good questions for you, but we'll keep it a little simpler this time. Why does OSHPD not adopt the California Fire Code according to the matrix adoption tables in the CFC?
So the matrix is screwed up, and State Fire Marshal is working on that. The matrix, for whatever reason this time around, just got really, really, really screwed up. So there are changes that are happening to that, and fixes are being made. As a general rule of thumb, the parts of I don't even want to say that because it's so general. The fire codes, the portions that have to do with maintenance and more that fall on the locals, that would be theirs. But I don't want to say that. What is true is the matrix is messed up, and that is being fixed. If you have a question, you're working on a project and you're not sure if this section in the fire code that you're looking at is adopted by us or not, give us a call. You can also look at the matching section from previous editions, just not to say that that's rock solid going to be the answer, but that'll give you an indicator of, if we'd adopted it before, chances are we should be adopting it now. But yes, the matrix is really, really in need of some cleanup.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think that's very common throughout the all parts of the California Building Standards codes that could always use some cleaning up. But I got another question for you, but this is regarding steel bracing in a structure and fireproofing. So if a kicker from a seismic brace is attached to the fireproof steel, does the brace have to be fireproofed 12 inches down?
So then you're going to look at, is that considered a secondary member? And so I'm glad that came up too, actually. When the State Fire Marshal made this change for that new section in the code, after, sometimes this happens, you write it, it sounds good. Writing code is believe me, it's not a treat. And you got about 500 people putting in their 2 cents, which is great because people have all different kinds of experiences and knowledge, and and help the code go in certain directions. But what starts off as a simple 2-3 sentences takes 2, 3, 4 weeks or more of sorting out of who wants it to say what. And then what happens is get printed, and then you see it in a different light. You read it again and say, you know what, that made sense when we were writing it, but I think that needs a little cleanup. That section needs a little bit of cleanup. The intent was like just making it clear that when you have the attachments to the structural members that are required to be rated, those attachments can be protected 12 inches out. So if that attachment is attached to, if that bracing is attached to a secondary member that's attached to a primary member, that may not need it. But if it's attached to the primary structural member, then directly, then that would need the 12 inches, should need the 12 inches out.
Perfect. I have another good question for you. Can an amended construction document or an ACD be submitted for a project under construction to eliminate the sprinklers from an existing elevator hoistway?
Yes, you can submit the AMC with the ACD. And if you have trouble with the language, because as you can tell, that got pretty wordy there, and there's a lot of history behind it, and potentially confusion because the two different ways you go with it, just give me a call. I can help you with that language.
All right, I have another question for you, and this is kind of a tricky one. So having to do with older facilities. Let's see, section 1008.2.3. Many older hospitals do not have 1 FC illumination in the exit discharge to the public way. What types of projects would trigger upgrade to compliant egress illumination?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And that's probably a question that needs to be answered in combination with CDPH too. In the OSHPD world, if you're not touching that, then you don't need to upgrade it. But if exiting changes, say you're doing a remodel and the old means paths of egress went out, I don't know, a different side, a different way, and now they have to have a new path that leads to the public way. I guess that would need, that's kind of harder to answer because that's going to be a case by case. So if the exiting path changes from the exit discharge through to the public way, that would probably require it. If there's work being done to the lighting outside in the through to the means of through to the public way, that's something we're probably going to have to look at because that falls under different entities as well. So this would most likely be for new on unless something completely changes with the paths of egress for the existing. But again, I don't want to give a global answer for something that it might change on a case-by-case basis depending on the design that's presented to us.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I got a question regarding MDF and IDF in a telecom room. So question, what is the fire protection requirements for MDF and IDF or telecommunication room?
So the electrical code there, and this year asking me to go back into my memory, which isn't always great even from what I did earlier this morning or yesterday, so I don't remember the section, but the electrical code requires the IDF rooms to be rated. And then there is I think I had a section in the fire code, but the easy way, non-technical, non-electrician way of explaining this and non-technical computer person way of explaining this is the brain room. So you've got the main room where the brains of the equipment is, and the equipment is with a that's the part I don't remember. It's specific onto what type of equipment is in that this room is serving. What type of equipment? So if it falls under the type of equipment that's mentioned in the electrical code, it's the equipment the room that's the main brain. So you got the main brain where all the main equipment is, and then it branches off to these other rooms. And these other rooms are basically like the little stations it needs to get the electrical to the other parts of the floor. Those rooms wouldn't need the protection, but the main brain room would need the protection.
Perfect.
Hope that.
Got another question for you. Sometimes the code says group I2 occupancies. Sometimes it says group I2 and I2.1. Are these interchangeable? Does it always mean both I2 and I2.1?
So that's a little broader, but it depends. So there are two different occupancies, right? There are two different uses, but a lot of the, I don't want to answer that too broadly. So stick with how it reads. If it says I2 and 2.1, then it goes with both. And if it doesn't and you're unsure, call and ask, because there are some slight differences with those as far as the fire requirements with those, fire life safety requirements with those, but they're pretty close. So most of the time it's going to be the same, but I'm not going to say that all of the time it's going to be the same, because there are some slight differences.
Perfect. And
but
I got
sorry, I add just a little bit to that, but if it, well, no, I'm not. I'll make it more confusing. Forget it. So most of the time it'll be the same. Sometimes it'll be different, but it depends on the situation of the scenario, the topic you're talking about.
Perfect. I have one last but not least question for you that was submitted, and more or less a confirmation. It says, please confirm rating requirements for temporary barriers and what is required by new and existing penetrations through temporary construction barriers.
Okay, so temporary barriers have to be the same rating as what they are temporary for. So for example, you have a temporary barrier at a fire partition, a corridor. That the difference being is how they terminate. So the rating, whatever you're using the temporary for, whether it's a fire barrier, then you have that same rating. Fire partition, same rating. Horizontal exit, whatever you have, it's going to, rating wise, hour wise, is going to be the same. The termination is what's different. So for the temporary fire partition, that can terminate at like a drop down ceiling. If you have a fire barrier or like a horizontal exit, also fire barrier, if you have a fire barrier temporary construction, that has to, it's got to terminate, it's got to be protected all the way through. So that's going to be hard to do in an existing facility, to bring that wall all the way up to the underside of the floor ceiling assembly above. So generally what you see is the old school way of like dog housing that out, where that hard lid comes across, meets another equivalent rating. So the short answer is it's rated the same as whatever it was, whatever it's taking the place of. It's the termination that could be different. So again, the fire partition temporary barrier could terminate at the, like at a drop down ceiling tile. If it's a fire barrier, it's got to have that rating across. It's got to terminate at a rating of at the horizontal portion as well. But usually that's done with the dog housing style.
Perfect. And with that being said, I want to remind everybody, and thank you everybody for joining our presentation, our session 2 of Fire Life Safety. I want to remind everybody that if you have any specific questions or questions that weren't answered during this webinar, please email them to, we have 2 email addresses. The first one is regsunit@oshpd.ca.gov, and the second email address is fdd.webinar@oshpd.ca.gov. Want to remind everybody that we have session 3 coming up next, dealing with the building code, and session 4 is going to deal with the electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and energy code, and how to remove an acute care building, and a couple of remodel informations and the cans that we have for that as well. So again, thank you all for joining us in this beautiful Tuesday morning, and hope you all enjoyed the presentation. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.